G'day everyone. Almost there, almost there. Couple more sessions to go. Ship it live at 5 o'clock, I think, and then we'll have Bash. Really excited about our next speaker. Obviously with all things ops that has been announced at Summit. Really great to have Patrick here with us. If you don't know Patrick, Patrick loves sports. He talks about sports all the time. Like, sometimes I wonder how he actually gets any work done, but he's a really good site reliability engineer. Anyway, Patrick's here to talk to us about how Atlassian does ops in 5 easy steps. So please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Kelvin. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Hill. I'm a site reliability engineer at Atlassian. I've been with Atlassian about 6 years and been managing major incidents for the last 4 or 5. I've led a couple SRE teams, and today I'm here to talk to you about how we do ops. As Kelvin pointed out, everything ops at Atlassian is popular, new and exciting, so I thought I'd give you a bit of context about what we have. Inside Atlassian, we actually have quite a few different patterns and practices. We have a centrally organized SRE team, we have embedded DevOps engineers, we have sysadmins, and we've tried pretty much every approach that there is. One thing I do want to call out, though, is that you need to try other approaches yourself. There's not one solution for every problem in the world, so please try out multiple models and see what works for you. Inside Atlassian as well, we've also tried like a NOC-style approach, where people are executing runbooks at all hours of the night and day. That didn't work for us, but we've got some other models in place. And we ended up, over the last 4 years, moving towards mostly an SRE-style organization. To give you some more context about Atlassian, we've got around 100 different dev teams pushing code towards our cloud services, which are around 600 services at the moment. There's about 5,000, roughly, services in total inside Atlassian, but around 600 that you might interact with. We have quite a few different tooling, pre-production, testing kind of services that we have around the place. We have around 2 major incidents every day. You might not hear about all of them, but you will see some of them. We have 2 major incidents every day, and that means that we have to deal with a fair amount of outages, a fair amount of problems during the year. Every day, we push hundreds of times to production, sometimes thousands even, across multiple products, including Jira Ops now, and welcome to Ops Junior as well. And we have many customers like you that rely on us. The reason why I've got the circuit of Catalonia there in the background is because all those things go together. We're the pit crew for your team. All those things go together to put your race car, that is your team, onto the track and performing as fast as it can. So, what are we here today to talk about? Well, I'm going to run you through how we go from planning changes to changing something in production, to responding to problems, learning from them, and then sharing them across our organization. This is kind of how most teams work inside Atlassian in some way. So I'll give you some tips, some tricks, some things we've learned, and you can take these back to your organizations and share them around. There are quite a few slides that you might want to take photos of, so have those cameras ready. I'll try and make sure that everyone gets a chance to take a photo of every slide. So let's starting off with plan. I'm going to run you through how we plan changes using Jira Software and also the team playbook, including a couple plays you might not have seen before. Typically, the reason why you plan is because no team has ever run out of work to do, right? I've yet to see a team in many years, in many different companies, that's actually ever run out of work. So you have to prioritize. You have to figure out what to do when. You have to figure out what matters. Now, we know this because internally at Atlassian, we have problems with prioritization ourselves, right? Not only in one team, but across teams. Teams rely on each other. Teams have dependencies. So we need to get better at prioritizing and planning to make sure we're doing the right things and doing them at the right time. Typically, when I think about how we do planning, things fall into 3 main categories. First of which being BAU, and that's kind of your day-to-day. For some teams, this might mean handling requests from other teams, working with other teams on certain little changes, things like that. Business as usual. Then, next level up, you kind of have sprint planning, and this is things you want to get done on a week or 2-week or even a monthly basis. I think most of you are familiar with how Agile works. I don't think I need to harp on that too much. And then lastly, you've got roadmap work. Now, in ops teams and DevOps teams and SRE teams, I typically categorize this as transforming your architecture, right? These are the big things that you plan across the year that you want to do to really transform the way you work and transform how your team operates. Now, between these three, you're going to have a different mix depending on each team. You're going to allocate different amounts of time to each one of these brackets. I can't give you any tips there other than just evaluate where you're at, figure out how much you need to transform your team, how much you need to run your team, and how much you need to grow your team. With that in mind, each team does it differently. Some of you will only ever have BAU work. I appreciate that. Some of you are only going to ever do transformational work. I appreciate that. Just keep those kind of things in mind when thinking about planning. The reason why we care about planning, as I said before, is to make sure that we can do things at the right time in the right way. And this is all part of running a balanced team. Up there on the screen is the logo that we have for our culture value of Build with Heart and Balance. I do want to call this out. Ops teams need to be balanced. You can't be responding to fires all the time. You can't be handling requests all the time. You've got to make sure that they're helping your customers in multiple different ways. So the first way to run a balanced team is something you might have heard of before, which is the Team Health Monitor. This is a play that's available on our playbook, so atlassian.com/team-playbook. Hands up if you've done a health monitor before. Cool, a couple people in the room, awesome. So go check that out. There's 3 different health monitors, I think. One for project teams, one for service teams, and one for leadership teams. So go run that with your team. It's a really good way to understand how everyone's temperature is, how everyone feels about the problems they have at hand, and what you can do to change that up for them. Cool, so the second play that I want to just run you through now is incident values. So this is something we came up with about 18 months ago from talking to pretty much every ops team inside Atlassian, as well as quite a few dev teams that run services. There was a bit of friction culturally between how Atlassian normally works when shipping server or data center products, and then how we actually run services. Some things didn't align. So what we did was we sat down, asked every team about how they want to actually handle incidents, how they want to handle firefighting when it comes up, and how they can actually feel like they're part of the team. So we came up with these 5 cultural values that align to the Atlassian cultural values, and then came up with examples about what that means to us and why it's important. The good news is this is also available on the team playbook for you all, so you can go back to your teams and run this with your teams to see whether these incident values resonate with you, or if you want different kind of values for your team. I can't say it more loudly, but culture is really important in ops teams, I'm sure you're all aware. So this is a good way to do a gut check for that when looking at incidents. All right, the last thing that I just want to talk about when it comes to running balanced teams is a thing internally that we call tech ops. Other companies might have something similar. This isn't new. This isn't, I think, too dangerous. But what we do for every team that runs services inside Atlassian, every week they sit down, check their metrics against what they expect it to be, and write up to say, hey, why did that happen? On the screen there, you can see a very clear example in red about a metric that was out of alignment. Their threshold was less than 1 second, and they got up to 4.18 seconds. So in that field, in the notes field, they then had to fill in and explain why that happened, right? They had to justify why what happened. Now, this is super important because each team does that across the board. Those all roll up into the head of that department and the head of engineering, and the head of engineering goes through every service and finds out, hey, why did you not meet your availability target, your reliability target, your latency target? So for ops teams, checking in your metrics every week is a great way to make sure that you're actually aligning to what customers need and what customers want. Cool. So hopefully those provide you some ideas to provide direction for balanced teams. Using those, you can then prioritize changes. So by doing those kind of plays, looking in, seeing what your metrics are, seeing how your team feels about where they're headed, seeing what, how you handle incidents, you should be able to then adjust your backlog, your roadmap, what you're doing day to day in order to run your team more effectively. All right, so magically, we've prioritized everything in the correct order. Let's go change something. I'm going to run you through now how we made changes using Bitbucket Pipelines. I do want to just have a call out, though, that changing software can be simple. However, more often than not, it breaks because you've overlooked something. Changing software does break things. Each team changes software differently, though, is something I just want to remind you of, not unlike how each team does planning and prioritization differently. Some of you may do manual testing. Some of you may go through arduous code reviews. I'm going to give you some tips about what we do when it comes to one particular problem set. But just reflect on this. Go back to how you do it. Maybe there's something there that can help you. So let's start off with a problem. This is kind of real graph of the number of services we have inside the company, and then the number of individual monitors we have. Atlassian's a growing company. We're getting more and more services over time. So as you can see, the number of services is going up. There's an interesting trend, though, that when you have more services, those services start talking to each other. So then you have to start monitoring how those services talk to each other. As you can see, those two lines have a different, gradient on them. And the number of monitors we have is only going up and up and up. So as you can see, the amount of services going up, monitoring is going up. Usually, though, you'd hope there'd be some usually you hope there'd be some kind of scale improvement there. What we actually found out, though, was the amount of time we're spending on monitoring was going up, but we actually wanted to spend it going down as things got more complicated. So this led to an SRE going on a bit of a rant in one of our chat rooms, going, I'm sick and tired of manually configuring 400 monitors for my service. Every time something changes, I can't do this anymore. Help, 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 help. Now the SRE joins in and goes, psst, have you heard about TERRAFORM? Have you heard about pipelines? Who's heard about Bitbucket Pipelines here? Cool. And what about TERRAFORM? Who knows what TERRAFORM is? Cool, couple hands. Awesome. So TERRAFORM's an automation tool built by HashiCorp. So just go check it out. It's great for configuring cloud services in particular. Basically, you provide some configuration options, and it goes off and applies things to cloud services. It also can extract data from those services, so it's handy to kind of use to manage configuration and do config as code. What one of the SREs pointed out, though, was you could actually set this up inside Bitbucket Pipelines, so you could do config as code changes without ever using someone's laptop. That previous talk that some of you maybe were here for around compliance, this is a great example of how we applied like a really good PRGB solution into Bitbucket Pipelines and made it work for us. So this is really cool because now you can edit code directly in Bitbucket Cloud. You can then run the build to see if it works. So TERRAFORM, I think it's verify. And then you can deploy it to production, all without touching someone's computer, and it just runs in the cloud. We found this really, really magical, though, because we were able to do this across hundreds of dashboards. One metric name changed from one thing to another. That then had descending effect on all the other metrics that we had on the back of that. Instead of manually going in and configuring and changing everything, we're able to do a one-line change in TERRAFORM that goes out to every dashboard, and the SRE's sanity is now restored. He's no longer fretting about making thousands of manual changes in Datadog. Cool. Uh-oh, the wheels have fallen off. So, turns out, things break when you change them. That particular example about monitoring kind of had a negative side effect. For those of you familiar with AWS auto-scaling rules, you kind of want to make sure that you actually look at those and look at your data before changing anything. Turns out a whole bunch of servers started scaling on the wrong metric and things broke. So, now it's time to respond. So, Jira Ops, we just launched that. I'm going to run you through some of the things that we learned from Jira Ops and have actually put into the product for you. We're going to maneuver through the incident lifecycle using Jira Service Desk, which is what we started using. Now we have Jira Ops, which is super exciting, Confluence, and Stride. So, first up, at Atlassian, we've actually got a pretty simple workflow, which is actually what you're actually seeing now live in Jira Ops. Tickets go from new to pending to fixing to reviewing. I always hear people talk about incident workflows and having like 100 steps to them. Don't bother with that. Most of the time, you will find that people can't actually click the buttons to transition things or edit things fast enough in order to make a long workflow actually worth it. So what we do is we have a simple workflow with some custom fields that we then edit and add in and change based on certain timestamps and events. You're probably wondering, though, when it comes to this, when it comes to how we raise incidents, where do incidents come from? Well, that's kind of an interesting question. Typically at Atlassian, we've got a couple different sources. Human monitoring, so people actually using systems. These are sometimes staff. These are sometimes customers like you. They report in, and they go, hey, this is broken, this doesn't work. We then also have machine monitoring. So as I mentioned before, monitoring tools can also raise alerts. Now these go into OpsGenie, basically, and then they go into Jira Service Desk once someone actually figures out what's going on. The important point I want to make here is there is actually 2 steps there. A lot of people just go straight from alert straight into incident. Like as soon as something breaks in your monitoring tool, go straight into incident. That's not what you want to do. You want to make sure someone triages it. Otherwise, you end up with a whole bunch of false flags. So keep that in mind. Cool, so now it's in Jira Service Desk. This will be in Jira Ops in the future, but for now we'll just stick with Service Desk. There are two cool things about Service Desk I want to talk to you about today that we do internally that you can use in your business. We've got a very quick, simple link for someone to report an incident, and I'll talk to you later about how someone can see if an incident is in progress. So we have go/incident inside of Atlassian. That then means that anyone in the company, technical, non-technical, no matter what time zone they're in, no matter where they are, they can raise an incident and get someone working on it. This breaks down a whole bunch of barriers, and as part of that, we train everyone in the company to raise incidents, right? There is not a single Atlassian who doesn't know how to do this, and it's nice and simple form. Jira Service Desk has great portals that you can use, particularly in helping business users. So that's something you can take away and think about how it might work for your business. The reason why this is so cool is, and I've gotten this email from one of the founders, you can guess which one later on, but it solves the dreaded problem of one of the CEOs of your company emailing you going, hey, why are people on Twitter angry at us? Because things are in Service Desk, everyone in the company knows how to use it. There's only one place you need to go in order to raise an incident ticket. So that's really useful because then you can get people all on the same page, they can all view the same thing, and they can make sure that the incident's underway and someone's working on it. Before we had this at Atlassian, we actually had 8 different incident management practices, each with their own project on a different Jira instance. I'm sure you can all see that's probably not that great. It actually ends up being a hellish problem to deal with. The second cool thing about Service Desk is SLAs and queues. So when you create a ticket, I think you're all fairly familiar with Service Desk, but you can put it into queues. This is actually a real screenshot from one of our instances. What we've done here is basically just separated up each category of work into a different thing so people can come in and see, hey, where is this in the priority list? Now, most of the time now, we do action incidents pretty much straight away. There was a time when we didn't, when we had that knock style approach where incidents used to queue up. And that's a really good thing about Service Desk. Service Desk helps you when you have more incidents and more tickets to solve than the people to solve them, right? These days we have more SREs and developers than incidents. Way back when we didn't. So the ops team actually had to wait to get around to a problem. Service Desk helps you prioritize them because you can set up filters, you can set up SLAs, you can really prioritize them in real time, and that'll help you solve incidents in the right order. One other thing, after the ticket gets created, we do have 2 workflow transitions that are there if the ticket isn't valid. The first one's rejected, which basically means that the incident wasn't real. This is important because then we can track to see which incidents were false flags and that kind of thing. The second one's tracked elsewhere. So sometimes we'll have duplicates, sometimes there'll be something already open for it. We can close it that way and then go to tracked elsewhere. The reason why these two are different is because we actually want to separate them out in reporting. We want to see how many times people actually raise false incidents versus some ticket exists somewhere else. Cool. After we actually triage the incident and make sure it's not like a false incident, that kind of thing, we then set up an incident chat room and an incident state document. The incident chat room looks like this in the sense that there's always the same ticket number for the incident chat room. We do this in Jira Ops now in Slack, so you can go check out the demo in the booth upstairs. But the point of this is that we want to separate out each incident from each other. I talked to quite a few customers, and they say they have every incident in one room. That ends up being chaos because you don't know which incident you're talking about, and you end up restarting the wrong server at 2 a.m. in the morning and needing half the team to wake up in order to fix it. So separate out your incidents into different chat rooms. You'll be much happier. The second thing I talked about there was the incident state document. Now, this is something that I think Google came up with. We had something similar, but basically it's a checklist to help you ask some initial questions about how to solve the incident. This is super useful, particularly for people who maybe aren't that familiar or comfortable with incidents. I think we have open sourced this as part of the incident playbook, so you can go online and see that. But the gist of it here is that we've got some initial things that people who may not be familiar with incidents or want to see where we're currently at, go look at this page. That's linked to on our incident ticket and automatically created when we create a new incident. For you, you might want to do this, particularly if you have issues with solving incidents sometimes. We use this for long-running incidents, particularly when we have handovers, because it encapsulates all the nitty-gritty details of an incident and what you need to know. All right, so you're fixing the incident. Things weren't going fine, but now they're improving. Now you want to actually get the team up to date with comms. So at Atlassian, we have this product called Status Page. I think you've all probably seen the public status page. it looks like this. Unfortunately, we're having a minor service outage. That's a public status page, and I think that's all pretty familiar. I think most people get that, what that does. We also have, though, a private status page. So internally, we have another status page, which is useful because we have some internal tools that customers probably don't need to know about. So we have that up there. You can see that we have it in a different color, so we don't confuse the two. And then we use that to keep staff in the loop as to what's going on. There's actually a third type of comms that we do when it comes to incidents, keeping everyone in the loop, which is privileged comms. So sometimes we'll get executives, and I'm sure you have the same problem at your companies, we'll get executives going, hey, I want to know more about this, can you send me an email on it? And then we'll send them an email on it. So just to recap quickly, 3 types of comms, 3 different audiences. You want to make sure that you're communicating with the right people about the right things with the right level of detail. It took us a while to get to this, so we're quite happy where we're at now. Cool, so you fix the incident, everything's fine, you've communicated about it. What we have when we actually close the incident, so go from fixing to reviewing, is on that screen we have distinct date fields for start of the incident, when we diagnosed it, and when the impact ended. The reason why these aren't set on workflow transitions is because we want to be able to customize it over time. Jira is great. It can show you the current status of an issue. Sometimes that date, that timestamp when you click the button doesn't actually match up what happened in the real world, so keep that in mind. And lastly, and this made its way into the Jira Ops product as well, we use markers in chat to identify decisions, tasks, important things, that kind of stuff. Before we had Jira Ops, we used to use hashtags. So you used to see hashtag action inside the chat room to then signify what that was, and then you can go back and search for that later on. So if you are using another chat tool, you can do that. Awesome. So the incident's over, everything's fine. I can take off the hat. Just to prove to you that I'm not actually lying about the workflow, that's the actual screenshot of the Jira workflow that we have internally. Works quite well. I suggest you adopt a simple workflow as well. Awesome. So now we've responded to the incident. It's now time to talk about how we learn from it. We have the post-incident review process in Atlassian using both Jira and Confluence. This is coming to Jira Ops as well, so we are giving you all the power of this. I remember going back in time, about 5 years ago, we used to do PIRs on Post-it notes. That's great when you've got about 4 people in the room and you have 20 Post-it notes. When you have 10 people in the room and you end up with 200 Post-it notes, not so great for the person who has to write them all up. So we moved to Confluence. Confluence has live editing. You can all open up the same page and collaborate at the same time, fill in the post-incident review together. You can make your PIR look good in Confluence as well by adding in graphs from other systems. I don't think I'm explaining anything new for those of you who have done post-incident reviews before, but there you go. We call post-mortem process at Atlassian PIRs, post-incident reviews, because no one died. Do want to call that out. There is a currently ongoing trend of making people feel more safe during post-mortems. Please join in that. There was a talk yesterday, I believe, by Adaptivist on this. You want to make sure your people are feeling psychologically safe during incidents, and calling it a post-mortem only ratchets up that tension. So just keep that in mind. You want people feeling comfortable. We also follow a blameless PIR process. At this point, though, you're probably wondering what's actually in a PIR, so let's just talk through that now. The first section of the PIR is all about the summary, what impacted the customer, and the timeline. We try and capture all those details up front because it gives us a starting point of what actually happened during the incident and what we're sure of. The next section of it are those 3 colored sections below that, being what went well, what could have gone better, and where did we get lucky. Now, these are reflective questions that we've taken from the industry. The reason why we ask them is because we want people to think about what happened and why. We want to make sure that people actually feel like they can change what's going on, particularly the where do we get lucky problem. That's a real important one to have, because then you start finding risks in your software and your systems that you didn't know you had before, because people can actually spot where there are gaps and where we got away with something. So after reflecting on that, we then have an idea of the root cause. I appreciate that sometimes incidents don't have root cause, a single root cause. They have contributing factors, but we have a field for root cause. And then we have actions at the bottom. Now, we had actions there, and then we realized that someone needed to approve those actions because not one software engineer can just change the whole roadmap of the whole company, unfortunately. We learned that we needed to move these approvals up the chain to someone who could actually change priorities, change roadmaps, and make that happen. So we jumped on over to Jira. Jira has a workflow. Approvals are great. You can use Jira to do that effectively. I think you all probably have seen an approval workflow in Jira at some point. This was going great until I kind of had this conversation with a developer in Sydney one time. Basically said, hey, that's cool, that's nice. I'm not reading someone else's Jira issues though. When these were in Confluence, it was fine. You could see the page, everyone can interact on it, but I'm not going to go digging in the PIR project just to read someone else's Jira issues. That's just not what I'm going to do. So let's move on then and talk about how we share learnings across the company. The important point that I want to just make here is that you need to connect this back into your software development process. Incidents don't happen in isolation. Post-incident reviews don't happen in isolation. They need to flow back into everything you do. So we had this kind of nice idea about sharing it with the company, which is just, hey, just blog about it. Just blog about it. It'll be fun. We started getting more and more blogs internally on Confluence. That was great. The only problem is, though, is that in order for a blog to be really effective, in order to make things change, you need to read it, then digest what that blog's saying, then go over and implement it in your system or service, then deploy it, and then make sure that deploy actually worked, and then figure out if that's actually fixed the problem, right? That's a lot of hoops to jump through, right? Most of the time, though, you're going to have to do that before you have the similar problem yourself, right? So between having the incident, doing the PIR, writing the blog about it, then actually going into your system and fixing it, then going in and actually making sure it worked, you've then given yourself a window in order to have a similar problem. Now, we have solved this internally, and I do want to just talk to you about that right now. We have avoided having the same problem over and over again. There are different root causes. They may be similar symptoms, but different root causes. We have a very low recurrence rate of incidents, as in we don't have the same incident twice very often. The reason why is because if you actually want to change software, if you want to improve how you do things, you have to focus on actions. I can't speak about this more loudly, but you need to make sure that you're not having the same issue over and over again by actually changing what you're doing, right? You've got to change something about how your systems work, how they interact with each other, and make sure that they actually are evolving. Now, we've achieved this inside Atlassian by putting an SLA on actions to be completed. So if you raise an action against a post-incident review, you have 4 weeks to complete it. That's the kind of rough SLA we set across the board. There are some exceptions for certain teams, but by and large, you have 4 weeks to complete those actions. If you don't, it goes on a report, the CTO reads that report, and then things start changing on roadmaps pretty quickly. Now, how can you implement this yourself? Well, we've tried a couple different things. What I would suggest you do is use JQL across backlogs. So if you're on one Jira server, label every PR action with the PR label, and then you can search across your backlog, and then see and use some reports to figure out how many things are still open. We've also experimented with internally. We don't use this anymore, but we did try it out. It might work for your organization. One PIR project with child actions on it. For your organization, that may work. The issue for us that we found was that we didn't have those actions being then in the dev team's backlog. So they didn't have visibility into it, right? So this might work for your organization, it might not. Give it a go. It's worth a try. Lastly, as I mentioned before, we are KPI leaders based on how often they're actually getting through their actions, right? If they don't meet a certain percentage, then that's a fail and we need to talk to them about that. And that gives us sort of monitoring for our PR process so we can then learn about it and evolve it. Cool. Everything's done. Time to go home. No more work to do. Of course not. Everything always starts again. As soon as you're done with one change and everything gone through production, it's time to do something else. This cycle just repeats over and over again. Thank you very much today. That's how Atlassian does ops in 5 easy steps. I'll be at the booth upstairs, the Jira Ops booth, later today as well, and at Bash. So feel free to come ask me questions. I'm more than happy to take questions now, though.
Thanks, Patrick. That red hat was a really nice touch. Does anyone have any questions? We've got time. Yeah, over there.
Also, we have t-shirts and hats at the Jira Ops booth, so come say hi. Also, check out the team at Ops Genie. They're a really good bunch. They really know a lot about how these things work.
Thanks very much. Thanks for sharing how you do ops. It's very interesting. So other teams that are not set up like Atlassian often have a project mindset where the focus is on only features. And I'm interested the way that Atlassian has shared how they prioritize features. They use this DASI model to say, we've got something we want to do. Is it going to be positive for customers, positive for business? Do you have a similar kind of DASI model for architectural improvements? Because that's what most companies that haven't moved to your model struggle with, is they know what would improve, but they can't get it out of a non-functional requirement to be prioritized. How do you advocate for these kind of changes?
Yep. So I've experienced that problem myself, right? Where you know that a non-functional requirement maybe isn't being, treated the right way, right? Like maybe it's too slow, maybe it's not reliable. What we try and do across the board is make sure that we do have goals of projects, goals of epics that actually do meet those certain operational goals. So making sure that your new feature ships with 3 nines of reliability. You do need to get leaders to buy in and make sure that they are committing to that. I'm a bit unsure how you can do that sometimes in a project mindset and project mentality, but you do need buy-in. The reason why that you get them to agree to that is because then they can make the trade-off themselves between how reliable does it need to be versus how quick they need to ship, right? So you need to make sure they're operating 2 levers at the same time. We do that internally with teams. I think you saw in the tech ops example that I gave, where we do make sure teams check their own metrics. You need to make sure that the people who are determining the priority of those requirements actually do own those non-functional requirements as well. Unfortunately, I can't give you much more of an answer than that.
Cool. Another question over here.
Yeah, hi. What is the lead time from the moment the last thing was committed to some source code into production? And we're talking about hot fixing, is it?
Yep. So there's quite a few different teams that have different speeds, right? Sometimes when you do a hotfix, you actually do want to go through the full pipeline. So for some services, that actually takes like maybe 12 hours sometimes to go through the full test pipeline. Sometimes a hotfix, though, you can make a change on the fly, so we can do it in like under 5 minutes. It really depends on what system, what service, how complicated it is, and how much testing we need to do. Obviously, you can abstract away some of these things, but it really varies depending on which service. I think you had a follow-up?
Is it the same deployment process like the development teams, or do you have like a special with, less approvals and all that stuff?
Yeah, so we have a break the glass procedure with some of our deployments where we will at the time, break the normal procedure, deploy, and then get retroactive approval for it to make sure we're in compliance. So there is some exceptions. Most teams deploy out of the same Bamboo server though, which then has a whole bunch of controls and auditing on it, so we can actually track to see teams are actually following the correct process. If you want to know more about that, the previous speaker, Guy Herbert, is a great person to talk to. He can give you more information on that. It's a really good, fun chat.
Any other questions?
Cool. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Just a reminder, all these sessions are recorded, and they will be online on YouTube either tomorrow or in a couple of days. So any kind of slides that you missed out to take a photo of, you can obviously have a look at it there. Or maybe Patrick speaks a little bit faster as an Australian. You want to kind of do it at half speed instead of the 2x on a podcast. But that's it for now. Everyone, thank you very much, and enjoy the next session.